Okay. Hey guys, it's Phantom, and welcome back, or welcome to my channel for another video. So, I was doing research because I wanted to do another Sims history video, and this video is going to be about who created the Sims or whatever, or the the genius behind the Sims. And hang on. I'm gonna quit my Spotify because I don't want to get copyrighted if I accidentally press play. So, yeah, we are on Google right now. And I just typed in Will Wright Sims. So, this is going to be probably a really long video, and I'm okay with that. So, this is from, so I found these videos, I found these videos on, Will Wright or whatever, and so I'm really intrigued to, watch this video called The Sims Creator Will Write a Life in Pixels, to hear what he has to say, So.
It was just a get-together. Everybody felt fine. But now we're all sick.
Oops. Hang on. Sorry, I was on the wrong channel for a second.
For your videos? Then you should check out Artist. Freedom! Ever since I was a kid.
And this video is from 2016, so it's 4 years old. So it might be a little outdated, but I'm going to react to it anyway.
I guess into 6 month things where it might be, a certain battle in World War II, or Houdini's lockpicking, or who knows what. I would just get obsessed with a topic, sometimes broad, sometimes narrow. My mother wasn't quite sure if it was healthy or not, but she basically kind of survived these obsessions. I was always kind of worried as to what kind of career I might possibly have that would allow me to do that. But luckily video games came around, and it's like the perfect career for somebody like me.
In school, when you went to school, you studied aviation, mechanical engineering, architecture.
Yeah.
But you ended up going into being a computer programmer, which is something that I believe you were totally self-taught at.
Yeah. Basically, I got my...
He was self-taught? I did not know that. That's pretty cool. I mean, okay, I've known about The Sims for a while, but I've never, dove deep into who the creator was. So, if you guys remember a video from, I think, 3 months ago, I did a video on the Sims franchise, A History, and I have a playlist that's kind of devoted to the Sims franchise. I know, a little crazy, right? But, I just want to know more. I feel like people should, know their game history, because it's pretty important. I mean, it's not that important, but it's still pretty good to learn about game history. If you're thinking about, I don't know, going into the gaming industry, or if you have, or if you love learning about that type of stuff, or if you're super geeky and nerdy. I know I'm super nerdy and geeky for that stuff. I didn't think that I'd love video games how I do, but apparently I just developed a love for video games at a young age. Okay, I haven't been in a computer store or a Best Buy in so long, and I really want to go to a Best Buy. I don't know why. Probably just browse around for probably just like browse around for computers and like video games and stuff. I don't know. But but yeah, like I there was a time when I actually went to like a store and bought boxed video games. Like, you know how those computer games would come in like those big bulky boxes or whatever? Like, yeah, I still remember getting that. I still remember like going to stores and like looking at all that stuff. And like there's some games that I actually want to think about getting, like Minecraft, for example, or something like that. I do want to get into Minecraft. I want to see what the hype's about with Minecraft because I've never really played Minecraft. I've watched videos on it, but I've never really played it. I've just kind of played The Sims my whole life. So, yeah.
My first Apple II while I was attending school in New York City, and just got captivated by this machine. You know, the Apple II was one of the very first, of course, kind of PCs, but it was just complex enough to where one person could pretty much fully grok it. You could understand the way all the hardware worked, you know, the way all the built-in software worked, and how to program it. Pretty much since then, computers have been so complex that no one person can understand the whole system. But it was kind of nice starting with that, so that at least at that level, I could understand the way the entire computer operated.
So, did you find teaching yourself, was it actually something that was a challenge that you wanted to achieve? Was it something that was just out of necessity then at that point?
I've only learned things effectively that I was obsessed with, and these obsessions of mine. One of my longer-term obsessions has always been robots, and at the time I was actually building these weird mechanical contraptions, and outfitting them with electric valves, and some of these things were hydraulic and a little bit scary. But I was getting to the point where I really wanted some control system, and the PCs were just coming out, and so the initial reason I bought my first computer was actually to control my robots. And so for me, it was just kind of like this tool, this add-on. Oh, no, I need to learn to program this thing. And, there was one Apple store in all of New York City that I would go to at the time. And on the shelves, there were these like little things that Ziploc bags, which were the very first computer games on the Apple II.
And I'm actually learning so much. Okay, like I never really thought, I'd stumble upon the world of video games. I mean, I've always loved video games, but never to the point that I love them now. Cause, like, as I grew up, I've always played video games, right? But like, it's never gotten to the point where it is now. Like, now I play video games every day. It's my job. It's really fun. I love it. I could spend hours playing video games. Like, I want to get, like, not, like, super deep back into it, but, like, I want to have, like, a proper setup. I want to have, like, a little space where I can put all my games or whatever. If I have to, I'll get rid of some of them, like, the ones that I don't really play anymore or whatever, but, I mean, I don't know how much one little bin can hold. So, yeah, like, I was never super... I mean, I always played video games from a young age. I think I got into video games when I was, like, I don't know. I think I got into video games when I was, gosh, how old was I? Like, I think I got into video games 14 years ago. In 2006. So I was like 4. And so, yeah, like that's when I got into video games, but it just progressed over the years. And then when I found The Sims, I was like, you know what? I love this game. Like, I am obsessed with this game. Like, I play it all the time. As you guys know, it's kind of my thing. I love The Sims. I've always wanted to work for or with EA. And just learning about like a franchise's history. Just learning about like a franchise's history in general. is really cool for somebody like me because I'm a nerd. Like, I've evolved into the craziest nerd ever. And I mean, gamer girls aren't that common. We're just kind of there. And so I think that people that get into video games are pretty cool. Like, I've always been someone that's been raised around video games. Like, always. I got got into, like, I play the Wii a lot. I have the original Wii, not the, like, Wii U or the Nintendo Switch. I don't really want a Nintendo Switch, because if a console isn't broken, why would I want another one? Like, if a console isn't broken, why would I want another one? Plus, it still works fine. Like, I'm not having any issues with it. But, like, a PC and a console are two different things. So, like, that's it's kind of the thing. Like, I just want a setup. I just want, like, a nice setup in here, and I want to, like, play my video games and everything, like, I can play games for hours, honestly. So yeah, I think it's really, really cool that somebody like him, somebody like Will Wright, made this whole franchise, because he made a whole community. Like, he started a whole community. Like, he grabbed people's attention with this video game, and this is a video game that's creating jobs, you guys. This is creating jobs. This is creating whole careers. Like, oh my gosh. Like, if it wasn't for The Sims, or, like, video games in general, I don't know what we would do. Like, we would just be, this whole, like, Sims community would just be people, just playing video games and not really sharing it with anybody else. So, yeah, thank you to the creator of The Sims for doing this. But yeah, this is really cool.
And I started buying a couple of those because I'd always loved games as a kid. And pretty soon I just became entranced with these little microscopic worlds inside the computer. The very first flight simulator, which was all wireframe graphics. Some of the war games that were like turn-based, things like that. And pretty soon, my interest in robots just kind of got, put to the side, and I just became fascinated with the machine. I was still doing, really learning how to write programs, do basic programming to begin with, but then getting kind of interested in simulations and artificial intelligence and all that stuff.
Your first published game was Raid on Bungling Bay.
Yes.
Which you went out to the Bay Area to shop around. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
At the time, the Apple II programmers that were making games, and there weren't many, it was like a handful of people, had been working on that machine for a while, and they really knew that thing inside out. So I thought, to level the playing field, I should get one of the new machines that's coming out. And this is right around the time the Commodore 64 was hitting the market. So I bought one like day one that it was available, and just grabbed the manual and spent the next 2 months just absorbing everything I could about that machine. And that's what I programmed my first game on, Raid on Bungling Bay. And it was, pretty much, how quickly can I make a cool game? And I didn't even put a whole lot of thought about, what the game was about. I really kind of studied the hardware features and what kind of cool things could I do with the graphics on the machine. And ended up with this pretty stupid, fly around, shoot 'em up game, which was Raid on Bungling Bay.
He made that? Oh my gosh.
And those are sound effects, it's not audio feedback. That was about the state of sound effects at the time. The Commodore had this one sound chip. And it wasn't even waveform graphics. Basically you would just put numbers into the sound chip and it would make random noises. And you kind of sat there and poked it and peeked it. And at some point, it would make a sound that sounded roughly like an explosion or a helicopter. And you You just go with that. It's totally trial and error. But basically, underneath this game, to entertain myself, I built this elaborate simulation of ships and trucks and networks, bringing supplies to the factories that most of the players weren't even aware of. But if you understood the way the infrastructure worked in this game, you could actually play it much more effectively. But it was totally wasted effort from the design point of view. But it kind of kept me entertained anyway.
So after Raid on Bungling Bay, you found that not only did you enjoy making the game, but you really enjoyed playing along with the landscape generator as well, right?
Right. Actually, that game was the kind of the initial conception of SimCity, because I built a program that allowed me to scroll around that little world, make the terrain, put down roads, buildings, and stuff. And it was basically my editor for this game. And I found I was spending a lot more time and having a lot more fun building these little worlds than I was blowing them up with a helicopter. And so after I finished the stupid helicopter game, I kind of kept playing with that program. And that's what it actually eventually evolved into SimCity.
What was so fascinating about cities to you?
I think cities are interesting in that you have all these dimensions collapsed into one thing that we're fairly, intimately involved with. Everybody knows what cities are like. They've been to different cities. They see how they're different. They understand, concepts of traffic, pollution, land usage. But it's very organic when you can put it into a fast forward. Basically, if you can look at a city over decades, it very much looks like an organism. You see the growth patterns and these cycles going on, and you start seeing these interdependencies. There's a circulatory system, a nervous system, all these things that when you're actually out there looking at just buildings, and roads, you don't see that. You see the daily operation of a city, stuff flowing through these networks. But seeing the growth of a city is a whole different kind of way of looking at it.
Good grammar and spelling are important, but if you want to write essays that inspire,
SimCity, it's interesting that there's this fascination, I think, with micro worlds, or models, really, at different levels. One of the things that kind of inspired me for SimCity was an old Stanislaw Lem story called The Seventh Sally. He had these two robots that he wrote a lot of his stories about, Trill and Klapaucius, and they were robot inventors that would go around kind of trying to outdo each other. And in this story, Klapaucius was flying around in a spaceship, and he saw a little asteroid, and he saw a little guy jumping up and down the asteroid, and he landed, and it turned out it was supposed to dictate.
I actually have SimCity, but I've never played it because it's not on Mac. I got it for PC, so I don't play SimCity, but I have it. So once I'm actually able to install it, I'll probably play it. I don't know how much I'll like it, but because I'm a huge Sims addict, and SimCity is a part of the Sims franchise. Well, it's a part of The Sims, but it's not like, the Sims that we know and love. It's like a whole different, it's like a whole separate game franchise. It's like a whole separate game franchise, and then he made The Sims 1 through The Sims 4, I believe. I think he still works on it. I don't really know, but I'm gonna have to do research on it or whatever. So yeah.
That was just totally irate because his civilization had exiled him for being such a tyrant. And Klapaus just felt kind of bad for the guy, so he actually built this invention for him, and he described in wonderful prose, basically this glass case about a meter on a side with all these knobs and levers, and he could issue edicts in there, and give pardons, and start wars, and just went on and on about how this guy basically had a whole kingdom inside this little box. And he goes back and he's bragging to his friend Churl about how he, at least made this one guy happy, and then his friend was, asking him more and more detail. Were the people really crying? Would tears fall from their faces? Oh yes, it was in every little detail. And then it kind of got into the nature of reality. Well, you really just, basically put this whole kingdom under his, this tyranny again. You idiot. It was kind of an oops moment. But anyway, Stanislaw Lem's stories were wonderfully philosophical. They were really more philosophy than science fiction. But I was just captivated with the idea of having a whole little world in a box like that. Where you were kind of the driving force, for good or bad, primarily a creative way, because I think, up to that time, most games were very action-oriented and also very kind of Walter Mitty escapist. You're saving the world or you're leading an army. And SimCity was about something that we actually have a lot more daily experience with. We have a relationship with cities, that we don't, most of us do not command armies or space armadas, etc.
So around that time, most of the games were arcade-style games. They had a definitive endpoint.
Right.
Is that something when you walked into SimCity, you said, hey, I just want to break the mold on this. I want to go with something that's a little bit different than what's already out there?
Well, actually, I never thought SimCity would be a big hit. I thought it would have kind of a, appeal to architects or maybe some strategy gamers out there, which there weren't many at the time. But I was actually very, surprised that SimCity ended up being such a big success.
Obviously, SimCity was a huge success, thankfully, and spawned a whole series of sim games. Sim Farm, Sim Life, Sim Earth, Sim Ant. Shall I go on?
There were lots and lots of sim games. In fact, I think we were kind of lucky at the beginning naming SimCity SimCity, because now we had a prefix. That was our brand. Was the prefix. This was third game I did, or second game I did after SimCity. I did Sim Earth and then Sim Ant after that. And so, we kind of went to Sim Earth and people were expecting Sim Galaxy next. So we decided to go the opposite direction. We went down to Ant. And Sim Ant was a very playful game, actually, relative to a lot of our other simulations. But we still tried to be very accurate in terms of the way the ants behaved in the game, the way the pheromone trails operated. I've always been fascinated with ants. One of the things I wanted to do with Sim Ant really was to show people why ants are so cool, especially adults. What it turned out is that big hit for Sim Ant was like 12-year-old boys. And they kind of already understood ants were cool, but they're the ones that played this game and bought this game the most. I don't think I convinced a whole lot of adults how cool ants were. In some sense, ant colonies are the most elaborate intelligence that we fully understand. We have no clue really about the human brain. We know bits and pieces about the way the brain works. But ant colonies, we pretty much understand the way they operate. And they're very efficient and very smart. I mean, a typical ant colony is around the intelligence of a dog in terms of problem solving and learning. Most people don't realize that, but I can go on for hours about ants. So I'll stop there.
Obsessions. Another thing that crops up in a lot of your games are helicopters. Obviously, your first game, right on Bungling Bay, the little traffic helicopter in SimCity.
Every version of SimCity had helicopters.
And SimCopter, of course, a whole game around a helicopter.
One of the things that we were experimenting with in SimCopter.
This is crazy, you guys. This is so crazy to be watching this and to be doing research on this to be doing a video on this, because it's crazy that he was, interested in architecture and then made a whole video game franchise from that. Not just SimCity, but The Sims in general. So yeah, this is so cool. Okay, this isn't really a reaction video, but this is history of the Sims creator, I guess, or the creator of The Sims, or who was the creator of The Sims.
It's kind of a simple flight simulator, but there are different models of helicopter. But one of the main things we're experimenting with is that the world that you're flying around in actually is a city that we built in SimCity. You don't need SimCity to play this game. It comes with a lot of, basically level-based cities. But if you have SimCity, you basically can take the city that you built in that and then bring it into this game and now be, point of view in the game. So a lot of the same dynamics that are happening in SimCity, traffic, fires, crime, all these things are still happening in Simcopter, except now you're basically trying to put out fires, chase criminals, clear up traffic by reporting it. And so we build this mission-based gameplay. In some sense, I basically had a very, very small team on this game. And I kind of wish that I had had a larger team in about 2 more years, because what Grand Theft Auto turned into is kind of what this was intended to be originally. It had a surprising number of the same concepts from Grand Theft Auto. It was a radio station, with all these simulated radio channels. You can get out of the helicopter, walk around, and interact with the people on the streets. But underneath, there's this whole kind of living city that you're flying around interacting with. Helicopters are just cool. I can't even say why they're cool. They're just so cool. Well, airplanes, basically, if you let go of the controls, the airplane will pretty much keep flying, for a while. Helicopter, you let go of the controls, it crashes instantly. Helicopters are dynamically unstable, which makes them kind of interesting, risky, and attractive at the same time.
So let's move up a little bit to the year 2000, a little bit closer to where we are now. It seems like by then you have become a suffixophobe, because you pretty much changed the way the Maxis name formula went for games and created a game called simply The Sims. What do you think the secret of the success of The Sims has been?
Well, The Sims started out as kind of this architectural thing, and the 2 most direct inspirations for The Sims really were SimAnt. And SimAnt, in an interesting way, in terms of, can we build an intelligent system, intelligent people that behave, in a wide variety of situations through distributed intelligence. And I'm not going to go into exactly how that works, but basically, as you put more stuff around the Sims, that intelligence is not in the Sim, but it's in the environment, and it informs the Sim what to do. So as you add stuff, like through these expansion packs, every time you added more objects into the game, the Sims became more intelligent. And, we had great success with expansion packs there. And one of our primary customers were 12, 13-year-old girls, and boys as well. But in some sense, we were coming out with expansion packs every few months, that they might, buy for $20 or $30. And it was their equivalent of subscribing to a game. Most of these kids, especially a few years ago, really didn't have the opportunity, to put a credit card online and play a game, subscription-based.
Oh, jeez.
But they could bug their parents and say, I want this expansion pack or that expansion pack, and since they've already got the other ones, it's a little bit easier sales job to say, okay, I'll buy you another expansion pack for The Sims. But in essence, they were subscribing for...
honestly, it's got, with me, I got into The Sims. I've known about The Sims for years. Since 2008, but I wasn't playing the computer games until 2016. And my parents actually got me the Sims game, and I got hooked. Well, not the original Sims game, but The Sims 4. They got me The Sims 4, and I got hooked. And then, a year later, I got The Sims 3, and I'm still very much hooked to The Sims. I didn't start from the beginning, but I've always been, super interested in The Sims. And this is just really cool. This is just really cool to learn about, because I never knew this stuff. So this is really cool.
For about $10 a month to The Sims, with all these expansion packs. I did a prototype of The Sims and worked on it for about a year, right after SimAnt. And we had a focus group where we brought in, a group of game players, and we had 4 ideas that we were presenting to the focus group. One of them was The Sims, which I was calling Dollhouse. And of the 4 ideas, that was the only idea that they all universally hated. With a passion. Absolutely hated. The other 3 they thought were pretty cool game ideas. I don't remember what the other 3 were. I don't think they ever made it to market. But I kind of learned at that point that not to trust focus groups at all, period.
So, obviously The Sims has been very successful over the next 10 years. The next game from Maxis was Spore, which I actually consider kind of a throwback to how the early sim games were. Almost an evolution, pun intended, completely, of Sim Earth and Sim Life. Do you kind of see it the same way?
Yeah, I actually learned a lot from Sim Earth. Sim Earth was a simulation of the entire Earth, through its evolutionary history, all the way from the formation of Earth through, the genesis of life and evolution of life, all the way up to civilization. But it was really about global dynamics. We had a weather model, climate model, evolutionary model. And in fact, I thought our climate model was pretty cool, and it was fun just kind of building a climate model that ran on a PC back in those days. But it was very, very sciencey. From a player's point of view, you had all these knobs and controls and graphs, and it felt like being kind of put in the cockpit of a 747 that's in a steep nosedive, with all the gauges twirling around. And basically, people would start playing the game, and pretty soon the whole planet would boil off, or freeze up, or life would go extinct. And it wasn't really clear exactly what happened. I mean, it was really hard to kind of go back and figure it out. So I think with Spore, we tried to do something that was graphically much more rich, but also something that we had a terraforming model in Spore as well. But it was something that was much more easily understood, but still, had some basis in reality. A major aspect of Spore was actually kind of going through the powers of 10 idea, where you start as microscopic life, you go through basically non-intelligent, larger, macroscopic life, and eventually become intelligent, move out into the galaxy. Spore had a couple of unique things about it. Number one is that most of the assets in Spore, the creatures, the planets, spaceships, buildings, were player created. That's a big part of the game, is that as you're playing the game, you design a creature, you design your spaceship, design your city. And when you create stuff in the game, it's automatically sent up to our database and used to populate other people's game installations. So once you go up to the galactic level, you're now flying. We had millions of stars, each of which had planetary systems, and each one had unique life and unique civilizations because we had millions of players always creating this stuff as they played the game. So creating the game was the process of kind of making the game. There's also kind of this whole powers of 10, where you start as a microscopic single-cell organism and eventually work your way up through larger and larger scales to the galactic scale, where you're kind of going between stars. Mm-hmm. So in some sense, it was kind of like Sim Earth, but we expanded it on, kind of at the bottom and the top, both directions scale-wise.
So, just knowing about your obsessions as well, I know the space program, especially the Russian space program, is an obsession of yours. How come, like although, there have been allusions to it in many of your games, you could be an astronaut in The Sims, obviously you had the Galactic Conquest phase in Spore, how come you've never made just a pure space-based or space-focused game?
Space is big, and it turns out stars are really far apart. And as far as I can tell, the speed of light actually is a kind of limitation. And when you take those things together, to build a realistic space game, you have to kind of look at, very different assumptions. It's not going to be, Captain Kirk warping around, a few days between stars. In fact, I've actually considered doing a game based upon realistic assumptions of space travel. In Spore, it's interesting because we have you going between stars and doing all this stuff, but we never say how long it takes. At that point, there's no clock or calendar saying how long it took you to get from this star to that star. But we actually built over 100 prototypes for Spore, when we were working on the space phase, most of which did not make it in the game. And that's kind of true of most of our games, is that we'll build, for every 10 prototypes we build, about one of them ends up with, some feature in the game. But some of the prototypes we built for Spore involved galactic dynamics and the way interstellar clouds get turned into stars and, back again. And, sculpting nebula, things like this, these kind of really interesting things that you might want to do in a space game. Mm-hmm. But again, in terms of fitting it in with the concept of Spore, they were totally, orthogonal to what we were doing in the game. So, a game like Spore, and even like The Sims in its later stages, these games get so very complex. One of the big challenges is how can somebody come up to this game and, never having played it before and understand it. You really have to ramp the player in and say, here's a very basic understanding of what you're supposed to be doing, and then from there, you kind of build complexity around them.
One thing I've noticed, is you always seem to focus on these life systems. You like to explore them and deconstruct them, mm-hmm. and figure them out. It's actually something that you yourself has referred to as an affliction that you have. Why would you call it an affliction?
Well, it just influences the way I see the world. I mean, it's, when I come into places I've never been before, I see things I've never seen before, I'm initially sitting there trying to reverse engineer, what is the overall system here, and I'm looking for patterns, and I'm trying to, in my head, build a simulation of what the way this thing works, and this thing, might be some new machine, it might be a social system, it might be a party, but it's very distracting to always be reverse engineering the world around you. Uh, but in that, so it is almost like an affliction, I think, almost maybe like synesthesia or something. But and that's the way I understand the world. And so even with simulations, what I try to do is, how can I deconstruct the world into these little blocks, these little Legos, and reconstruct a model of it, an abstraction of the world. And as an abstraction, you're throwing away most of the detail and looking for the core things that will give you, some rough behavior of the whole system. I definitely kind of think of the world differently, and the part of it's being, the objectiveness of, interacting with people. Team building actually is a really interesting example that I've always tried to bring people into my teams that are a little bit better at the kind of social glue side, where I tend to be very honest and direct with people, and sometimes it, is a little inappropriate, not so much, to like the Asperger side of the spectrum, but still, it's one of those things that I can do, but it requires more energy from me to kind of get into that, very subtle social diplomatic interaction with people. I'd much rather kind of sit down and say, "Oh, I loved what you did here. That sucked." Da 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 da. Just kind of go through the list. And some people appreciate that. It really kind of comes down to who you're dealing with.
I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about what if you have any thoughts or ideas about the convergence of games and movies. Just wondering where you see it going.
I think that the most fundamental, I would kind of fall back from referring to as movies and to talk about storytelling. Whether it's television, movies, whatever, and play. Because to me, those are the two fundamental things we're dealing with here. Are basically play, and play is a superset of games. Games have rules and structure, and so they're embedded in play. But they're also, things like SimCity really aren't so much games, in that they tend to be more open-ended play. The best stories kind of lead to play. The best games lead to storytelling. But they're very different. I think storytelling is kind of primarily based upon the idea of empathy, that I can understand the characters and feel what they're feeling, even though I'm not driving the characters. They're kind of stand-ins, emotional surrogates for me to experience what's going on in their story. I think play is very much based upon agency, the fact that I'm touching, I'm making a decision, I'm driving. I have the steering wheel, which is very powerful, because I think that there's certain games have an emotional palette that I think, for the most part, is inaccessible to storytellers. I felt things playing games. I felt, pride. I felt guilt. I felt accomplishment playing games that I've never really felt watching a movie. There are other emotions that I've felt watching a movie that I've never really felt in a game. So I think they both have different emotional palettes, but I think that they're self-supporting. I think that they're both also fundamentally educational technologies.
Mm-hmm.
When you think back as to why do we enjoy storytelling, why do we enjoy play, we have a limited bubble of experience, to which to kind of build models of the world around us. And we can only build a very, fairly rudimentary model of the world with the amount of experience we have over an entire lifetime. But we've compensated for that by basically learning to acquire more experience, either indirectly from somebody telling us a story. So you can tell me a story, and I can now incorporate that experience into my world model, even though it never happened to me. Or I can be in a play experience and actually experience that in kind of a toy environment, a very safe environment. And so I can kind of learn why a bridge might fall down, before I become an engineer, or even decide I want to do that as a career. So I think that both these things were actually discovered by, evolution millennia ago. And that's why our brains basically have been wired to enjoy these things, because they allow us to accomplish, more elaborate world models with our limited base of experience.
In some ways, the console market is matured. The graphic intense adventures, all the genres seem to have been done, and all the originality, innovation seems to be coming in the indie space. Where do you think the games industry, will be 2 or 3, 4 years from now?
I think the game industry is heading toward a much healthier space right now than it was 5 years ago. And it's extremely disruptive. It's, from my point of view, it's kind of like the Cambrian explosion, back a few 100 million years ago, where we have all these branches now evolving, they're just exploding. And it's not just, kind of genres of games, but platforms as well, and delivery mechanisms. And so, we didn't have the iPad 2 years ago. We didn't have smartphones a few years before that, or Facebook, or any of these platforms that are now major platforms. I think the old model of we have a console cycle every 5 to 6 years is obviously dead. There will be newer consoles, even announced this week. But it used to be a very predictable cycle that had happened over a couple of decades. And now I think consoles are going to be, this thing that, a certain group of people have, a console in this room. But the idea that you're tethered to a location to play a game seems antiquated already. All these new platforms coming out are causing people to kind of rethink not just kind of what a game is, but how people play a game. I noticed that now I'm too lazy to go in the other room where the computer is because I have my iPad in front of me. And so I've actually ended up using my iPad a whole lot more than I ever would have predicted, when I bought it. I just kind of bought it to, try it out. And I thought, okay, I'll play with it for a couple months and then put it in the closet. But no, I think that, in fact, for me, sitting there, even when you talk to the TV people now, what they talk about is the two-screen experience. That people are sitting there watching their TV show with their iPad or their smartphone, looking at the actors, using IMDb, whatever it is, and now shows are starting to integrate these live feeds, so I can start doing stuff on my pad as I'm watching the TV show. So I think we will have a new generation of platforms emerging 5 years from now that is maybe where half the market lives, and it might be tablet computing or something between that and smartphones. But I think the idea that people are untethered from a particular room is a very powerful long-term idea.
Your games have always been difficult, well, not difficult, but very time consuming, and they always take a long time before you actually get a reward. They take a lot of investment. There's a lot of games nowadays that sort of hold your hand, or there's a save point every 2 seconds or something like that, and I find that our attention spans getting shorter? And if you believe that, how does that affect sort of your future developments?
I think that games in general are getting geared toward people, well, I wouldn't say with less attention span, but it's more like the way they're playing games. They're playing them interstitially now. It used to be somebody would go sit down in front of their Xbox, put in a disc, and sit there and spend at least an hour playing, Counter-Strike or whatever. Now you're on Facebook, you click on your Facebook game, you play for a couple minutes, then go back, do some other stuff and check in with it every now and then, or you pop out your cell phone. So I think the rise of interstitial gaming, where people are playing games during the cracks in their lives, is one of the kind of things that opened up the market for things like Facebook or mobile gaming. I think there are still, kind of these, sit-down, session-based games. I think in some sense they're going to be kind of branching off in different directions. I think the equivalent is kind of almost, and right now I think there's a big difference between these two. I think right now the difference is kind of between, a movie and YouTube. There's no television in between, and on the movie side, it's more like Lawrence of Arabia movie, where these games are built for, 50-hour, and it used to be people were paying $50 for these games, and we pretty much had to justify that, there's 40 hours of gameplay here at least, before you get to the, end of the game, whatever that is, for more linear games.
Yeah, the games are pretty pricey, to be honest with you, but they're worth it. At least in my opinion, they're pretty worth it for me, because I use them on a daily basis, so...
The kind of games I've always liked to do, though, tend to be more open sandbox games, where there are metrics of progression, but it's not like you have mission-based and you have to do A, B, C, D. Spore is a slight exception in that Spore did have these levels that you were clearly in this level or that level, but they were meant to be replayable, as separate games. But I think also the indie game scene, one of the things that's caused a lot of the experienced designers to go to either Facebook or mobile gaming is the fact that the complexity of these games is an order of magnitude less of what we're building, like for the console market, right now. The amount of time and effort, it's most of the games I've worked on in some form or another have taken me 5 to 7 years from initial conception to the day I shipped it. You have to be pretty patient to kind of work on, the same product for 7 years. I usually stagger them and have them kind of overlapping. But it's incredibly refreshing to be able to kind of do an entire game project in the course of a year, which is really, a little bit closer to something like movies. Some movies, of course, are epic and take 5 years, but really most movie production happens a little bit shorter time scale. So I think that there's kind of an attraction from the designer's point of view by making these smaller games. I think you're still going to have these kind of long epics, but really I think that we're seeing right now the market being overtaken almost by these shorter attention span things.
I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. That's everybody. Please.
As game developers, we really are experts at engaging the players. We know how to pique a player's interest and keep them coming back for more as long as possible. We know how to tune the difficulty level just perfectly to keep challenge at the right spot. We know how to get players to collaborate by designing systems that encourage them to do so. We know how to balance classes so that people form collaborative teams.
Okay, so that was it for this video. I think that's all I'm gonna react to, because I'm freaking tired today. I don't know why, but I'm tired. So that's gonna be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and please subscribe to my channel for more videos. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys!